Welcome back. Let's now talk about Euripides' Bacchae. This play was written between 408 and 406 BCE, and it details just one episode in the house of Cadmus, and one that ends tragically. Well, what happens? At the beginning of the play, we see Dionysus walking to Thebes disguised as a priest of Dionysus. He's not there to make nice. He's not there to share a message of joy. He is there to dominate Thebes because the people of Thebes have been disobedient. Early on in the play, we also meet Cadmus, the legendary founder of Thebes, and Tiresias, the prophet that we've seen in other works of literature we've seen so far in this class. And the two are dressed up like followers of Bacchus. They're dressed up like Bacchans, male Bacchans. And they've got their goatskin robes on. They've got their thyrsus, right? They're going to go out into the woods and dance like followers of Bacchus because they know it's the right thing to do. However, Cadmus' grandson, Pentheus, who now holds the throne in Thebes, wants no such part of it. Why doesn't he want any part of the worship of Bacchus? Well, for one, he believes that the worship of Bacchus induces women to be immoral. He believes that out in the woods, women are being seduced by men and being encouraged to drink too much. He also believes that it's taking women away from their homes, where they're supposed to be weaving and taking care of their children. Remember the women's work we talked about so much in the Odyssey. So he rejects this. So he makes fun then of his own grandfather and Tiresias when they try to encourage him to worship Bacchus and go out into the woods. And because of another thing he has against Bacchus. He believes that Bacchus is illegitimate and not really a god. He believes it's just his aunt's illegitimate child. So he mocks his grandfather, and he mocks Tiresias. We know what happens to people who mock Tiresias, and sends them on their way. And it's true, they do look foolish at first. Euripides is really good at mixing the comic with the tragic in his plays. Well, the next thing we know, Bacchus has indeed been detained and is in the palace. And as Pentheus is interrogating him, we find out that, in fact, all of Bacchus' followers, the Maenads, have been freed and have run off into the countryside. Pentheus detains Bacchus in the stables of his barn, and that's when the miracles start happening. His Maenads are freed from prison by some sort of magic. Later, he'll destroy the palace of Thebes in a kind of earthquake. Also, we find out through various messengers that he gives his followers superhuman powers. The power to enchant animals, the power to make milk and honey sprout from the ground. He makes his followers able to carry fire on their heads without burning. His followers are also invincible. They can't be stabbed or beaten down in any way. Later on in the play, he'll make Pentheus hallucinate and believe that he's seeing things that he's not seeing. One of the things that Pentheus will see is Bacchus sprouting horns out of his head. And indeed, in some of the images we have from the ancient world of Bacchus, he does in fact have horns. He's thought of as a horned god. Finally, Bacchus will be able to pull a treetop down to the ground and let Pentheus back up on it when Pentheus is trying to spy on the Maenads out in the woods, and this will have disastrous effects. So Bacchus / Dionysus is in fact really a god, and he shows how much a god he is through miracles, through signs that everyone can witness. Let's talk about what he represents, the symbolism of Bacchus in this play. Grapes in their cultivation, to be sure. Drunkenness and loss of inhibition. Well, the drunkenness part is what Pentheus expects. The inhibition part, and how people lose them, is what happens right away when Cadmus and Tiresias decide they don't care what they're old men. They don't care if they look ridiculous. They're going to go dance out in the woods. Nature and its lush burgeoning. The followers of Bacchus are out in the woods, and ivy seems to be growing around them, and they're nursing baby animals at their breasts, right? So they have this primordial connection with nature. Humanity without the restraints of civilization. Women are leaving their homes in this play to go out into the woods and worship Bacchus. They're leaving their babies, they're leaving their looms, they're leaving their housework. Civilization breaks down, in a word, when Bacchus comes to town. Bliss and violence. This sure plays a role in the last act of the play. In this part of the play, and in the part of the play where we see the Maenads first going crazy, they seem to be ecstatic even as they're running and attacking people. even as they're tearing a cow limb from limb, even as they're tearing Pentheus limb from limb. They seem to be excited. They seem to be in a frenzy. And there's a word for this kind of frenzy. The word for this in Greek is orgia, which means frenzy or madness. And in fact, this is where we get the word orgy, which also came up in the video that SNL made about Bacchus. Now let's talk about what the worship of Bacchus means for those who follow him around. In this play, he is presented as culturally alien, right? Dionysus comes from the East. He's been spending time in the East, in Asia. Lydia, Phrygia, these are in Asia Minor, by the way. India, and Bactria. And Bactria is what is now Afghanistan. Unlike other Greek gods, he demands recognition. That is to say that you had to publicly profess that you believe in Dionysus. No other Greek god demands this. He's unlike the other Greek gods in that he's kind of sexually ambiguous. We can see from this image that he's wearing a long robe, and he has all these garlands all over his hair, but he doesn't really have a beard in a lot of the images we see. And his skin is light-colored, meaning he's been inside the house or not being out in the sun very much. And this is considered by the Greeks to be effeminate. Also, he confuses the vision. Unlike other gods who seem to be what they are, he actually intentionally makes you hallucinate and changes shape on you while he's talking to you. In this play, his worship also represents for us an epiphany, or a sudden realization about the true nature of things for mankind. A lot of the followers that follow him around in this play, that's not the chorus, but the women who are off in the woods under compulsion, are forced to realize that they need Dionysus in their lives, and that this is the way things must be. Other people will get this realization only at the end. Some won't get this at all. He represents extremes in humans, and violence is a big part of that. I mentioned this earlier, but there is thought to be a great deal of violence in his worship, especially by outsiders, and violence will be done to those who don't follow him. Right? Pentheus will be visited with the most terrific violence for his non-belief and his blasphemy. I mentioned this earlier too when I was describing the kind of god Dionysus is, but for us he represents theater, and here's why. He allows human beings to temporarily become someone else. For this reason he's associated with theater, because what do actors do on stage but inhabit the person of someone else? This is what Dionysus is up to. He allows human beings to be someone else. So the Greeks had a natural association between him and the theater, and it's not an accident that the festival of theater in Athens that took place every year was the city Dionysia. Also, in theater you see illusions on stage, and both characters and audience have a set of realizations, and maybe even go through a series of transformations. Thus, watching a theatrical performance is a kind of mediated worship of Bacchus for the Greeks. Another way that Bacchus/Dionysus is unlike the other gods that we've talked about so far is this. Unlike the other gods, Dionysus promises his followers a happy afterlife. And this represents a pretty strong break between what we know about the ancient Greeks and their thoughts on death and what this new kind of god represents. You believe in Zeus with all of your heart and publicly proclaim it, that doesn't mean that anything especially good is going to happen to you in the afterlife. If you believe in Dionysus with all your heart and celebrate his rites, you'll actually be promised joy in the afterlife. And for this reason, he's frequently associated with death and the goddess Persephone. And Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. And Persephone becomes the wife of Hades, the god of the underworld. We often see Dionysus pictured with her, and he frequently seems to move about between the upper and the lower worlds. Finally, I'd like to talk about the end of the Bacchae and try to extrapolate from that what it has to tell us about the Greeks and the way they thought about the gods. And we can probably do some comparison and contrast here between the way Sophocles views the gods and the way Euripides views the gods. But what happens at the end? Well, what happened at the end is the following. Pentheus is torn limb from limb by his mother and his own aunts. They actually rip him apart while he's still alive. And he's guided into a scenario where this can happen by the god Bacchus himself. First, Bacchus hypnotizes him and then takes him out into the woods, dressed up in drag. Finally, he puts him into a place where he can be seen by his own followers. Then, he announces to his followers that this man from the outside is there to spy on them and leer at them. Remember, Pentheus believes that dirty things are going on out in the woods, and he's kind of curious about that and wants to see it. Bacchus takes offense at this and decides to kill him. Bacchus's followers tear a tree down and rip Pentheus limb from limb. Now, as they do this, they believe that they're killing a lion, and indeed, when Agave comes back into town with her own son's head on a pike, she's very happy about it, and she presents it to her own father, Cadmus, with joy. He's horrified when he looks at it, and it's only several minutes into this scene that Agave has the realization that she's killed her own son. She's done the thing that no mother should do. Well, what happens next? Are our characters forgiven? Are they given some sort of compassion now that they've atoned for their sins? Well, no, not at all. As a matter of fact, Dionysus does the following. Dionysus transforms Cadmus and Harmonia, and remember, they've been loyal to him this whole time. He transforms them into snakes, as we see here in this picture, and he makes them leave Thebes on a chariot drawn by oxen. Later, they're supposed to lead a barbarian invasion to come back into Thebes and destroy it. What else happens? Well, Agave and her sisters are permanently expelled from Thebes, never to see their homeland again. So far we have horrific transformation, we have the god forcing people into murder, and we have people whose lives are destroyed. Is he compassionate? No. He has no compassion for Cadmus or his wife, even though they've been loyal to him. They're associated in their guilt with their family because of what their family has done. Is he forgiving to them? He tempers his punishment a bit at the end. Later on, they will go to a nicer place in the underworld after they die, and he does tell us this. But for the most part, not. He's not there to spread forgiveness. Does he come on a mission of peace? And to answer this, I'd like to read a passage to you that starts off the play. He says this: like it or not, the city has to learn that it has to go through a true conversion to the rites of Bacchus. You know that Cadmus makes his grandson Pentheus king with all the kingly perquisites. That Pentheus opens war on a deity in me, wards me off his sacrifice, cuts me from his prayers. Very well. I'll show myself to him in all of Thebes a god indeed. And when everything has happened as I wish, I will remove myself to another land and there reveal myself. Dionysus is at war with Thebes, because Thebes has been disobedient. Thebes has disbelieved in him. So what does all this have to say about not only Dionysus, but the Greek gods themselves? At least in Euripides' vision, their will is inscrutable, because even if you do what they ask you to do, you'll be punished, like Cadmus and his wife. He asks that you believe in him, but until he shows up, he offers no proof that he's real. So it's not until he reveals himself to you in his wrath that you have any proof that he exists and should believe in him. And what about the other gods? Their wills are also inscrutable. Hera might zap you at any minute for something you've done with her husband. The Greek gods demand complete loyalty and may give rewards in return, but rewards aren't necessarily given out to those who believe. At best, you'll not get punished in most cases. And in the case of Bacchus, he's not there to be your friend, and he may even be malevolent. Stay tuned for my lecture on how the tragedies stack up.